Welcome to the Counterweight podcast. I am Doug Rogers, Chief Revenue Officer and Managing Partner for Waypoint Healthcare Solutions. And I'm joined weekly by my co-host, James Canary, founder and owner of the Upper Right Corner. Together, we are focused on speaking to and learning from growth leaders across the healthcare space about their journeys and lessons learned. James and I want to explore how growth leaders manage this tension not only for their teams, but also with their leaders and in many cases, board members and investors. We will discuss with our guests the career journey they have been on, key influences that help them put them into the position they are today. We will talk about successes and challenges, what they learned from these events for themselves and for their teams. Join us each week for a new episode with our guest. You can find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, Instagram, and LinkedIn under the name The Counterweight Podcast. Subscribe, like, follow, and give us feedback as we go along. Now on to the show. Welcome. This is an episode of The Counterweight. I am joined by my co-host, James Canary, and as always, super excited, very, very pumped to have the conversation that we're going to have with our guest, Juan Corona. Thank you so much for joining in this episode. I just know that we're going to have a wonderful time and super, super appreciate you investing the time with James and I and ourselves today. So Juan, welcome to the podcast. Why don't we just start? Let's let our listeners know what you're doing these days, where you are, what your title is, and then we'll dive right in.
Yeah, sounds good. And thanks for having me on here. This is awesome. Long time listener. So this is great. So yeah, as you mentioned, my name is Juan Corona. I'm head of sales, vice president at now a little past startup at a company called Track My Solutions. We focus on just employee health compliance. So if you think about, providers, nurses working in a hospital, they need to track all their health compliance items such as vaccines, TB, fit testing, and all that jazz. So we automate that entire process for health systems.
Wow, that's a really, really cool thing that y'all are doing. And I know we're going to talk more about both the journey with TrackMy and the experience that you've had there. But I will just as an aside just say it has been super, super fun to hear from you and from our other guests the different ideas, the different things that they're tackling in healthcare. And on one hand, how many problems there is to solve out there, but the creativity to go solve those problems. And certainly that has played a big part in what you and your partners have done at TrackMy. Juan, why don't you just guide us? How did you first get started in a sales role? Or how did this journey start for you way back when?
Yeah, that's we're going back into time there. Pretty deep. Funny enough, I never envisioned myself being in the position I'm in today, much probably like a lot of people. I actually wanted to go to school to be an investment banker. So my whole background degrees, finance economics. So, I love that. I love the diving into numbers, analyzing them. And I actually ended up getting an internship with a great company here in Kansas City called Cerner in their finance department. And so really how that, fast forward how I got there from intern to sales. One day, and I was in the purchasing department, I saw these $10,000, things popping up, like $10,000 purchase, $10,000 purchase. I'm like, oh, these are all the same numbers. I'm like, this must be an error. And I go to my manager and say, hey, this is kind of odd. And they're like, oh no, those are the President's Club winners. They all get $10,000 plus everything else. I'm like, how do I go do that job?
Now, wait a minute. I thought that was just Doug Rogers' weekly expense report.
It may have been.
Yeah, the client dinners that Doug was expensing.
To be fair, James, that was more than $10,000 a week. So just, well, that's a different story, different time. It's all good. So I did not realize this. So you started in finance in the purchasing department, which is, certainly not a traditional, if you will, journey into sales. But talk a little bit more about, so you saw what people were getting. how did you then make that transition?
Yeah. So kind of decided after that, like, hey, this sales world is pretty neat for a lot of reasons, right? Especially, oh yeah, definitely that right there. So I actually didn't immediately go into sales. I actually moved into from an intern to a more of a business analyst role. And I think at that time we called it competitive intelligence. So more strategy, understanding the healthcare market, where companies were going, so our competitors, where startups were being scrappy and innovating new things. And this was like 15 years ago, something like that. So, think about everything that was hot 5 years ago. That's what was first being talked about 15 years ago. So really it was developing playbooks. What are people saying about pop health before it was called pop health? Big data analytics before it was called that. And so I had the fortune of researching, understanding these companies, who their clients are, how they're getting into the space, why it mattered. And really that's what set the precedent to catapult me into what now is a sales career. Talk about drinking from the fire hose really quickly, really fast. And what does this word mean? And going and researching it. And keep in mind, the internet was obviously around, something not that old, but there was not as much publicly available information out there. So this is really what kind of set the next stage for the career. Is I found myself calling. I'd get the number off the website and just call the company directly and say, hey, I'm looking at your product. Can you tell me about this, and this? And I'd write it down like, hey, appreciate the time. And people like, how did you get this information? Oh, I just called.
I just called. That's right. I just called.
Tell me more about this calling. Do you use a phone for that? Does that involve talking to another human? Because if so, I don't want to do it.
Bold strategy. Let's say it pays off.
So I just want to dig into that a little bit, because you showed initiative by saying, hey, I want to go into this sales thing. You got to have tenacity to go do competitive intelligence, to make those phone calls, to take those risks. Where does that come from? Is that something that you saw growing up? Did you have people in your life that instilled that in you? Where does that come from, Juan?
Yeah, I would definitely say from my parents. So they're first generation, Americans, from Mexico originally, and seeing them. I mean, they put it all out there to come here and make a better life for themselves, for us. And so I'll get a little emotional there, but I have all the opportunity to go succeed. Go grab it. The risks that I see in my life are nothing compared to what they experience. So why not take those risks that are very calculated, that have a tremendous return? And if I fail, I tried. And that's really the biggest thing here is, we're all presented with different opportunities in life, A, B, and C. We decided to take the conservative route, the high reward risk route. And I always, from seeing my parents, why not take the opportunity and go do something special? And so that's kind of what I've always instilled myself in doing, that is let's take a risk and take a chance, because I never want to sit back and say, gosh, what if I would have done that? What would have happened?
That's just really, that's really rich right there, man. Like, I hope everybody's hearing that. I heard a speaker last night he's a psychologist, and he was talking about being authentic and talking about living as our authentic selves. His name's Dr. Brad Johnson. We'll post his info here, so it's a shameless plug for Brad, because he's awesome. And the way he said that was, is it worth failing at? So like, is that thing, so going and trying competitive intelligence, going into sales, going and taking that risk, is it worth failing at? Right.
Yeah.
And you saw that opportunity in front of you, and you went for it. So I suspect that's a pattern for you. Like, that wasn't the first time, and it won't be the last. So kind of walk us through those next milestones in your career. What were some of those maybe risks or unknowns that you faced?
Yeah.
And how did it go? What worked out, what didn't, and how did you get to where you are now?
Yeah, no, definitely. So I'll skip a couple years here and kind of go into actually getting into a sales role. So I was fortunate enough to get placed in and going and focus into I would say the middle market of new business at a company called Cerner, which we're all familiar of. And I didn't know at the time, again, wide-eyed, bushy-tailed. I just want to get out there and go do something. And I actually got one of the hardest territories out there, most difficult territories to work in, which was the New England region. And as we know, that was infamous for one of the biggest competitors having everything out there. And so really my biggest thing, again, taking those risks, I want to get in front of people and get to know them. What's the challenges? Maybe not today, maybe tomorrow, but hey, let's just get to know each other. And I didn't know this was not the correct thing to do. I walk into hospitals and go directly into the C-suite office and say, hey, I'm here to see Bob, Susie, Sally. Oh, do you have an appointment? Did I need one?
I love that, dude.
Again, this is like 23, 24-year-old self. And that's what we were taught, right? So kind of going back, there was that CR program that Cerner had. And I think a lot of the things that I do today were instilled there is just go get after it. Go fly out there, go walk in, make connections, understand the problems, current state, future state initiatives. That program is so vital to launch into Juan walking into a hospital randomly and asking for a meeting with the CEO.
Did you get kicked out of any facilities? That's the ultimate badge of honor.
So I did. And I to this day, I think I have a trespassing, like you cannot come into one of the Boston hospitals. So if we ever go there, I can't go.
You're on the list.
I'm on the list. That hospital will not be mentioned.
Watch out for this guy.
Yeah.
Wicked awesome.
That is phenomenal. And we're going to come back to not just that experience, but we're going to reuse a word that we've talked about in a couple other episodes, which is grit. But I wanted to focus on one thing that you talked about, which is the ability to take risk. What you saw in your family and your parents and how that put things in perspective. As James just asked, it sounds like when you entered into the sales role and you were out in the field, so yeah, you did something audacious. You walked into C-suites. I'm guessing, as you just said, every single one of those was not a, hey, we're glad to see you. And I have to imagine, I don't know, guide me. What was the first one like? Like the very first time you walked into a C-suite office, were they like, Juan, man, we've been waiting for you to come talk to us. Let's sit down and have a chat.
This is going to be a terrible example, and now it's going to be the gold standard. But this is really what happened. I'm not making this up. So it was. I drove up to New Hampshire. I won't mention which health system, but I'm good friends with the CIO till this day. And I was just like, hey, I'd like to meet with the CFO. And we can't see you, but leave your information and yada yada yada. I'm like, absolutely. Here's this, here's that. And I was like, you know what? Let me go find the IT office. I went to the IT office. By the time I crossed the street and was planning on entering the IT office, I have an email from the admin saying, hey, the CFO would like to schedule a meeting with you later this week to talk about potential opportunities of transitioning to another system. And I was like, well, that's pretty easy.
Wow, this is pretty easy.
I love that. You were about to go into the basement and find the IT folks, and all of a sudden the CFO wants a meeting.
Pulled you out. That's right.
Fantastic.
Oh yeah. No, it got way harder after that. It was nothing compared to the first one.
No, but that's amazing, right? Is having those successes like golf, right? Mm-hmm. You get that eagle or birdie or maybe a hole in one every once in a while, right? Those are rare, but it keeps you coming back.
That's right.
Absolutely.
You can succeed. So you keep at it. So talk about maybe when something didn't go so well, you hit a challenge, either as an individual contributor or as you moved into management and leading others. When is it maybe not gone so well, and how did you deal with it?
Yeah, I would say there's definitely, and I think this is the biggest opportunity, right, is learning from our failures.
Yeah.
Because truly, the wins are the wins. We take everything from them, and we have the success, and we talk about them. But I think organizationally, leaders, individual contributors, we sometimes don't analyze, like, why did this not work? And I'll tell you some of the early days, the things that didn't work were not being as strategic as I am today with folks. So think about that multifaceted sale, that big, 40, $50 million deal that we're working on, not involving more parties into the table. That was something that, because again, wide-eyed, bushy-tailed, didn't know, didn't know exactly everything in those very early years. That's, I think, a big failure that I personally had and I had to work on is how do we go involve the CEO, the CFO, the CMO, the CNO, the IT, everybody at the table, because sometimes you'll find out the reason that we didn't buy your system was actually we were building a new hospital. We couldn't buy a new EMR because our cash coming in from that new hospital was not till July. We were in January, and all you had to do is say, hey, I can actually smooth out your payment terms. So that way,
Right.
when your cash comes in from that new hospital, there's no blip on the radar.
Right.
And those are things over the course of time, as we get older, more experienced, we start learning more of the operational side of healthcare, not just the sales side, which is tremendously valuable. When you start learning the financials of a health system and how you can work into their complete financial, portfolio, whether it be capital, OpEx, whatever it is, it becomes powerful. You are
Yeah, I want to
you're
dig into
good.
that just a little bit of the being strategic, because we hear about this a lot. We
Mm-hmm.
all were trained in strategic selling, but
Yeah.
just kind of diving a level deeper of like I imagine like in those opportunities, like you were doing all the right things in terms of selling. You were doing the blocking and tackling. You were being responsive. You were going through the sales process, but you were doing it at a level, right? You were at a layer where even some of those people, I suspect, did not know about the broader strategic initiatives that were going on above the waterline.
Oh yeah.
So how do you take what you learned there and how do you do it differently now and how do you coach your team up to stay strategic?
Yeah. I think it comes down to big time on training. It's
Man.
going and understanding, let's use the financial example here. Go and look up their annual reports, understand what they have committed uh, to their constituents. A lot of these organizations, they're county run, they're state run, and you can see their entire initiative package for the next not only a year but 5 years. So it's how do you hitch your wagon to those initiatives that the CEO, CFO, COOs are compensated for, but your director levels, they're not privy to that information, right? They're keeping the lights on, which good for them because they have a lot going on themselves. But there is another layer, like you mentioned, that is out there to understand. And I think one thing that I learned is go. The data is out there about these organizations. Go find it, and then start matching your value proposition on how you get them wins politically, but also from an operation perspective. That right there is the winning combination of find the initiative. Why, how does the CEO, CFO, CXO win?
Right.
They'll take you to the promised land at that point.
Yeah, that's key. Like the way you said that, I think is worth, flashing on the screen here, Doug, is get wins for everyone.
Mm.
Right. I think we get really focused on moving things along and getting wins for ourselves and our team. Is everybody involved getting wins? Who are those that we don't know about that need to get a win out of this? So I think that's really good advice, Juan.
Oh yeah,
Well, I would also just add, James, that I think that it is easy as a salesperson to have a mindset of I need to sell this. I want to sell you something. I need to accomplish something. But in reality, and sales, I think, is one of the most ultimately roles that creates humility. I'll have to say that 5 times fast. But really, what I hear Juan say, and I see in other people who are successful, really, really good salespeople are you people. What makes you successful? What are the challenges that you're dealing with? What are the things that you need to have a better day, have a better year, etc.? And then matching those things together. What I love how you've talked about this. I think it's a great piece of wisdom and insight. I'm sure some of that probably came from your role in competitive intelligence because you're having to do that type of research, piece things together. But as you transitioned into a sales role, aside from just the natural grit, that tenacity that you exhibited, what did you see in other people, whether it's peers or leaders, that helped you say, hey, I need to be more like that? How did you learn some of these things that go beyond just kind of innate skills that you maximized, if you will?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. There are definitely a handful of people that you just could tell they were levels above. That you're just like, wow, how are you able to do that? And you all were fortunate to have a couple of those folks on here. So I won't mention them by name, but a little shameless plug. Go listen to some more of the podcast, everybody.
Yeah.
Um, but one of the big things, and this is a thing I tell the team today, anybody, it doesn't even matter if it's individual contributors, project management, product team. When we come to a conversation, whether it's in person or virtual, hey, what brings us to the table here? I want to hear, I want the client to talk for the first 15 minutes and what's going on, understand what's going on, and then let's react. But now we know, hey, I came into this conversation, I want to talk about, and I'll use TrackMy as an example, everything TrackMy, soup to nuts. When in reality, they are, this is their concern right here.
Mm-hmm.
Let's go crush that. Let's go crush that problem, that concern. Once we create that massive win for that leader, now let's go talk about, hey, as a part of the implementation or as a part of getting you these wins, we saw this, and this as an opportunity to get some more wins for you in your department, in the organization, politically, et cetera. That is one thing that I saw in a lot of folks in my early days at Cerner is stop focusing on selling the enterprise, get in, create wins, and then expand, which I know that's very tough because obviously the mission versus margin, um, everybody has quotas, company has a lot of, Wall Street, whether you're private, et cetera, you have goals to hit. So it's a tough act to balance, but the ones that do it very well, they are good.
Yeah, I want to dig into that as we think about that pressure or tension between mission and margin. And it sounds like you're creating space, literal space in the meeting for them to speak into what is on their mind, which is they're telling you what their business problem is.
Yes.
So why would we not want to hear that? And I think it's that tension of, I've seen this and I've been guilty of this myself, of feeling like I need to push the entire enterprise and show them how great we are. And I got this great slide deck and all these smart people I brought with me. So let's just jump into the show and tell. And I think the lesson I'm hearing here is create space. Create space for the client to share what is going on, why they're there, how they're coming to the table that day, that morning. And it sounds like that's worked well for you. And it
Yeah.
hasn't eroded your ability to deliver. Right? You're still able to go get business done. It's not a therapy session. Am I accurate there?
Yeah, it's not sit and tell me everything wrong. And I'll tell you what, it really catches organizations off guard, especially, on the one-on-one, it feels good. But when you have an entire giant team for the first meeting, they bring 20 people to the table. I always like to joke around and say, I see we invited everybody on this one. And, it's like, hey, and when you drop that, so what brings us here? How can maybe help you? I don't know if we can. Maybe we can. It 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 almost confuses them because they're so used to, here's my product, here's my product, here's my product, and we're flipping it and saying, what is your concern? Maybe I can help you. It just has worked so well, and that's learning that from the early days. So kudos to everybody that
Yeah.
paved the way.
Well, and Juan, I'd be interested in your perspective here, but it is one thing to do that as an individual contributor. As you've grown your career, you have people now around you, you have people that report up to you. How do you model that behavior and how do you coach that behavior? And I'll preface this by saying, I think it is challenging for the person who is earlier in their sales role. And for those of our listeners who find themselves in that position, that you have a double whammy. You walk into a sales pitch and it is easy to gravitate to I versus you. And at the same time, it is probably more nerve wracking to impress your boss who is with you. And hey, I need him or her to hear me pitch, and I need her or him to have space to talk. And I may be more focused on them than I actually am on the client. So I know we're fast forwarding a little bit, but just talk a little bit about how you model or coach that now with team members to give them space to be better, to be more effective in those conversations.
Yeah. I never want to come off, and I think this kind of sets the tone for everybody I've had the privilege to work with, uh, team members, people that report up. I am the most vulnerable person in the room always, because I think if I firmly believe this, if I model that, hey, there's opportunities where I could improve,
Mm.
it brings down everybody's guard. And you know what? Okay, it's okay to mess up. And if you really truly think about it, in order for a business to scale, nobody's going to come in and be a master of all day one. So we have to allow our team members, leaders included, we're going to trip and fall and we're going to get some skid marks, etc. We need to allow that in order for us to become a scalable company and just blow it out of the water. And so really when it comes to my team, I'm always, like, gosh, what'd you think about that? I think I could have said this different. And honestly, allow them to provide me feedback as well, because it opens that door for now, I can mess up. It's okay. And I can listen to the feedback that Juan is providing me. And it's not being in a judgmental way. It's actually like, hey, we're all trying to grow together here. And I think that's important for leaders, is creating that vulnerability as kind of a cultural thing.
Wow.
That's
Dude,
powerful.
this is a huge, huge revelation on vulnerability, because I think we are expected to always have our shit together, right? And have all
Yeah.
the answers. There's this perception or ideal, and I don't know where it comes from. Because I think if you really talk to a client, they don't, they expect us to know what we're doing, but if you're too polished, or you're coming off as the smartest person in the room all the time, that's going to turn people off most of the time. So there's that, being the most vulnerable person in the room, being the most curious person in the room, asking the questions, creating a safe space.
Mm-hmm.
These are things that traditionally are not associated with being a chief growth officer, sales VP, individual contributor, club trip winner.
Yeah.
Yet you have modeled these things and found success in your career.
Mm.
So those two things can coexist,
Mm-hmm.
right? They're not mutually exclusive. Man, I really want our listeners to hear that, because I think there is a perception that being in sales leadership, chief growth officer, is you have to be charging the hill all the time and command and control. And I'm not. So what you're sharing here does not sound like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's crazy. Yeah.
So put your finance hat back on for a second, though, and imagine now you're in a board meeting,
Yeah.
right? Because the dynamics in board meetings are always interesting, right? You got
Yes.
people who have usually significant stake in whether or not growth is happening.
Mm-hmm.
And there's targets that get set. How do you approach those meetings? How do you, what is your persona in those meetings, if you will? And how do you strike the balance between like a realistic target? And if it's not realistic, how do you then navigate those conversations?
Oh yeah. Uh, Again, I've learned from my past experiences and seeing people that have been very successful and sometimes not so successful. One thing I definitely I would encourage everybody: do not inflate the pipeline whatsoever. That does not do you any benefits.
All right, we're going to flash that one on the
Yeah.
screen. Do not inflate pipeline.
Well,
Yes.
and
Okay.
I know you said that somewhat joking, but you're very serious about it.
Oh yeah.
I want to stress, and I'll be the first to say, look, I have fallen prey to this easy road in my own career. And I've had to learn the hard lessons. Sometimes not learned them as well as I should have, but I've had to learn these hard lessons. It feels good in the moment to tell a rosy story, and inflating the pipeline is like a sugar high. But, and I think, Juan, where you're going with this, it will come back and kick you in the rear end, and it's going to hurt a lot more, and may have some really bad outcomes than if you would have avoided the sugar high in the first place.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it's crazy because when we start looking at, we'll eventually get to like funding when you're a startup and all this jazz. You start looking at some of these companies and you're like, gosh, when they're valued at how much? 500 million? Like how? Oh, they have a tremendous pipeline.
Do they?
I don't know. Do they? And so, I've always modeled myself in like, if it truly is a qualified opportunity, let's forecast it. But there's certain, not forecasted, let's put it in that segment in the qualified category. And then let's move it accordingly as we're doing things. So, we're going through security review, we're doing pricing negotiations, implementation. So it's very important that as a sales leader, you establish like, here are the different pillars that we're going to cross throughout the whole sales process. And, my solution is different from somebody else's solution, right? So your sales stages are going to be a little bit different. But at its more highest level, you're trying to move it through the sales process and accurately forecast for the business to then go make investments and bets on the business. So I think my biggest thing I've always done is always be very conservative. If we believe that, we can get a deal in the next 30 days, I'm always transparent with our organization. Say, hey, we have a full understanding that we can get this done by the end of quarter in 30 days, but we know shit happens. And the CEO went on vacation that last week. Nobody knew that. And now it's slid into Q4 for whatever reason. Is that the end of the world? Not likely, but it's good to always be completely transparent and say, hey, we've checked the CEO's calendar. Who's going to sign the contract? He's not going to Barbados for the weekend. As funny as that sounds, that has happened.
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh,
yeah.
And
yeah,
so,
I mean, you brought up a point too. I want to make sure our listeners know you've been a founding member of a company. You've been on the kind of early stage team of a company. Talk about that and how did you? I know for a lot of us, like we're optimists. Most of us are optimists, or we wouldn't be in this job, right? And we have also short memories, right? Like a cornerback or safety in football, if we get beat on a route, like we just forget about it and it's next play. But optimism's great, but then you're starting this new thing and you want it to go well, and we want to keep people happy and keep things moving. How do you strike that balance between that persona and attitude and optimism toward the world and reality of actually getting the business done to grow the company? Talk about your approach.
Yeah, that's a careful dance, right? Because there's some things that are being talked about at its highest level that would scare some folks. Full transparency. TrackMine in its early inception when I joined. It was as we were closing deals, as we were putting them in the pipeline, like, okay, we got coverage here for cash flow, this and that. So it truly talk about the most delicate dance of, we have to close this and forecast this correctly in order to pay liabilities, payroll, benefits, and things like that. And so it goes even above beyond like just talking to the board investors. That's whatever. But now we're talking about people's livelihood, that we're everything we're doing in sales is contributing to people's livelihood at a more microscopic level than ever. And so that's you have to be good. You have to be conservative. You have to be accurate and understand when your deals are going to move, push, close at a more finite level than ever before when you're in a startup, when you're very early on.
Yeah, like you were in survival mode in that situation of like, okay, how are we going to be able to make payroll? Are we going to be able to pay these things to actually do this? So what was your rhythm? What was your communication like with your co-founders or your founding members? What did that look like? Did you talk every day? Did you talk on the phone just one-to-one? What was that rhythm like?
Yeah. I would say with our founder, Jeremy, every, every couple hours. So honestly, it brings me joy because that, as crazy as that sounds, that that experience of we are going from zero to going to crush it, it is an adrenaline rush. It is an excitement of like we're bringing a new product to the market that nobody's thought about. Nobody's thinking about this because you have these old mundane systems, these crusty things that just kind of work, but they don't really work. And truly, it was a conversation every day with Jeremy, our founder, but then our product team. Hey, we're hearing this from the market. Can we do that? Oh, let's talk to our developers. Let's go get a meeting. And so I would say on a given day, I would talk to 3 or 4 parts of the company in order to, and in its entirety, ensure that the solution would meet the market demand. Product dev, CEO, our finance group, our chief strategy officer. It was many. If you look at my phone calls then to now, you'd be like, wow, this guy was a telemarketer probably.
Yes,
So it's
you as the like when the pressure was the highest and the stakes were the highest, the communication was also at the highest frequency.
you got
And
it.
I think that's important because sometimes in our people pleasing tendencies, if we have those, like we may not want to share some of the bad news or, oh, what if I don't have everything figured out? No, you were just talking every couple hours, as often as you could, it sounded like, so
Oh
that
yeah,
so that the team could stay coordinated, even if you didn't have all the answers.
absolutely. Because honestly, in those early stages, everybody's involved in the operations and the finance of the business. So everybody had to move in parallel perfectly to make this work. And we were very fortunate. We'll eventually get to this, but really, finding your pillar clients, right? Your big clients. If you all heard of crossing the chasm. So going and finding those innovators, those early adopters that they believe in your mission and vision, that's really what got us going. Is like we found these foreign health systems that were innovators and really propelled us to the next. And I think that you start looking at that, everybody was focused on that, right? Not only on daily conversations, everything, but then it's like, hey, hey Jeremy, hey product team Paul, is that individual's name? I have an organization that wants to do this, this, and this. I think they would be a great candidate for them to be a strategic partner with us. Let's go see if they want to do it. And sometimes they say no. Sometimes they're like, oh yeah, let's go do this. Let's go crush this together. So talk about that, right? The sequential moving parts. But then it's also like, hey, we found an organization that wants to be a big partner of ours and transform this market. We need everybody to come now and get this going.
Yeah.
So
I,
those are the
I
golden
wanna,
moments.
I want to focus a little bit on, and you talked on this one, but one, when you were making the transition into TrackMy, you were in healthcare, you were in healthcare sales, and you were more so focused on the digital front door, the patient engagement, and providing solutions, which at the time was a really hot space, continues to be a really hot space. But you started to get involved with Jeremy, with TrackMy, et cetera. In our conversations, my sense is that you got a pretty good early view that there was product marketing fit for the TrackMy concept, for the TrackMy solution, which that's a whole separate conversation around, hey, what does product market fit really mean? Because I think that's easy to say and hard to assess in a meaningful way that gives you confidence. But you got a sense, hey, this thing is real, has real potential. In that first year, as you were sitting down with the other leadership team members, et cetera, how did you think about giving guidance 12 months out? What is the opportunity? What's the revenue opportunity that we can go achieve? Because, as you mentioned, it's important to be rigorous around your pipeline. There's real impact, positive and negative, to getting that right or wrong, especially in an early stage company. But when you're just starting out, what were some of the things that you use to model and say, hey guys, I think we can do $1 million this year?
Yeah, no, definitely. I think it's really understanding the niche in that market. So we're in that onboarding / employee health compliance space. So it's really understanding, hey, what do those sales cycles look like? Are they like an Epic and a Cerner where they're 18, 36 months? That'd be terrible, right? How can we condense this if possible? And there's ways to definitely do it. I know sometimes sales leaders are like, there's no way I can condense my sales cycle. There's absolutely ways to do it. We just need to be vulnerable and do those things. But topic for another day. But ultimately, really, it's looking, hey, here's my market. What does a normal sales cycle look like? But then also, what is actually a price that my solution brings to the table, like the value? And I always strive to, if I'm going to charge X, the value has to be 8X that. So that's how we modeled our what our pricing should be. So here's your return on investment. Here's what we believe the time savings would be. It's 8X what we're actually charging you. And when you start looking at it that way versus like, oh, I want multi-millions for my solution. If you back into the value, it's a much easier sale for these organizations. And so then to answer your question, Doug, really it's the first 3 months of going to market, testing the market, talking to the network, talking to individuals, prospects. And then that right there models out, okay, based on these 3 months, we know this price works in critical access, in community hospitals, in the IDN market. And we're seeing that we're moving through the sales cycle pretty quickly, so we can anticipate maybe a six month sales cycle. That's when you're able to take that algebra equation and model it out over the course of time. But then talk about 24 months from now, 36 months from now. What if we add BDRs? What if we add account executives, sales directors, VPs of sales? What does that math look like based on those first 3 months? So it's one of those. It's a lot of testing. There is no, when you first start out, there is a tremendous amount of testing that has to go into it, but you have to get out there and just do it and then adjust your formula accordingly.
Yeah. One, I'm just going to draw the parallel back to your seminal early experience of just simply walking into a CEO's office. And I think there's a lot of power and both scary but energizing to just do the thing, do the hard thing, get past that barrier of uncertainty. The other thing I want to I'm going to ask this in a roundabout way, I guess, but I think many people, I know I felt this when I was going through similar exercises. I don't always know how to do that. And so sometimes I feel like you're literally putting your finger up in the air and trying to make a guess. And what I heard from you is there's an aspect of an educated guess, but it's really more so getting confidence in the education side of that. Meaning, what is your formula? What have you seen that gives you validation? And pressure testing it. Can I extend it out another 6 months, that it doesn't fall apart? It's not just simply saying, hey, yeah, I think that's right. I'm going to leave it at that. And then let's go hope for the best.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that's where a lot of organizations, you see them, they get this giant VC, PE funding, and they stick with the same formula. And it's like, no, you got to keep tinkering because now you've just got gas to pour on the fire. The formula can change. You could actually become more profitable and maybe even provide more value to your clients in this or that way. So I think it's always a learning lesson. It's always a course that you have to keep coming back to. And how did we get to this originally? Okay, well, what if we do this? And if it doesn't work, big deal. We can go back.
Right.
I mean, you can always adjust.
You're constantly calibrating, right? You're not ever really done with that. Like,
exactly.
Things change, market conditions change, buying types. I mean, the stuff that worked 5 years ago with like BDRs and marketing campaigns, a lot of that stuff doesn't work anymore. People don't buy the same way, right? So would love to hear some of those things that are working well for you. But Doug, I may have cut you off, so go ahead.
Well, I was going to ask, my impression is when you joined TrackMy, you were essentially you were the salesperson. I know everyone sells, and we can have a conversation about that, but you were really the first salesperson, as I understand it. As you got some momentum or continue that momentum, what was one of the first hires that you made? Kind of to James's question,
when you started building the team, what's the first investment or first couple investments that you made to then advance the go-to-market and supercharge that beyond just simply all the great things that you were able to do as an individual?
Yeah. And I'll give credit first to Jeremy. Jeremy was the first salesperson. Founder-led
Yeah,
sales.
yeah, which is a powerful thing and important.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I'll say the culture and the inspiration that he brings, that right there, talk about choosing the right company. And we haven't talked about that, but you definitely want to get married or join an organization that has founders, leaders that display everything we talked about: the vulnerability, the challenging, the inspiration, the mission. And so, I want to give credit to Jeremy there, because that definitely has all those, and as the first sales leader of the organization. But to answer your question there, really one of the big first, I guess you would say, purchases or contributions to the sales team is, I think that we live in such a digital age where automation exists. We're an automation company. If we're not automating processes that are very mundane and routine, things that may take 10 minutes for me to do, but when you start stacking them up, gosh, that took 3 hours that we could have been strategic selling, modeling out clients that we want to go pursue, things like that. And so really one of the first big things is bringing those sales tools into play. AI tools that do the work for us in the background. We just program it. Here's who I'm targeting. Here's what I want to say. Content, digital, social media, all that jazz. Automate that. There's so many great tools, and you can spend less than $500 to automate so many different things while you're focused on the actual business of what your company does. So I think that right there, talk about early stage companies.
Yeah.
How do you get your most bang for your buck? Sales tools.
Yeah. And we're not
happy to share.
We're not sponsored
we don't
yet.
get any endorsement money for this or anything, but if you don't mind, give us your list.
That's right.
What are 2 or 3 tools out of the box that you'd say, hey, if you're starting a company up or you're in scaling mode, trying to grow, what would some of those tools be that you'd recommend?
Yeah, I'll give you an example here. A founder that I met a couple of weeks ago, and just they're developing. They're in MVP mode right now. But I suggested to her, hey, why don't you go? There's this website called InVideo AI, and essentially you can tell the AI everything that you wanted to create as reels, because their ICP, their your ideal customer profile, they're clinical individuals that are at bedside nurses, and we know that when in the nursing, little round table there, sometimes they grab their phones and they'll play on their reels and stuff like that. So I was like, hey, what a great opportunity for you to push market content subliminally through reels, through videos on Facebook, TikTok, Instagram. That in video can create that. You can tweak it up, down, left, right, music, captions. But right now, as you're building your MVP, your proof of concept, start educating the market about this niche that exists. They may not even know it, because they just, they may not know it exists. That right there, you would traditionally need to go hire a marketing team, a marketing individual, maybe somebody, local university as an intern. Those are costly things to bring on if you're an early stage company. That app costs, I think, like $20 a month, and you can pump out 60 days worth of marketing content in 20 minutes. And really, when you're talking about early stage companies, getting people to know you, your brand, who you are, that's the way to do it, right? Just content, valuable content though. And so the next one that goes along with that. So here's where the secret sauce is made. So there's another app called Dripify. Dripify connects into your sales navigator and allows you to connect to people. It also does some things that are probably not good, like spam people. Let's ignore the spam feature. But you want to curate a list of everybody that is my ideal customer profile. So let's just pretend, chief nursing officers, chief medical officers, and CIOs. I curate a list. Boom, here you go. Now you can add those people to your network. Be creative and say, hey, I'm actually trying to solve this thing in the space. I think it'd be worth us just being in the network. Don't blast those people. Don't spam them. once they add you, leave them there. But now, because they're connected to you and you're generating these reels on social media, TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, because you have them here connected, their algorithm, they're going to see everything that you put out. So they're going to learn about you subliminally the whole time. You've done nothing. You've not been annoying. You're educating on the market. And eventually, when your product goes from proof of concept to full-fledged, they're going to know, hey, I remember that company that did that. You're right there.
Yeah,
Dude,
I love
love it.
those ideas.
Yeah.
Very cool.
But that was a little long-winded, but definitely
Yeah.
super valuable.
Super helpful. And I know some of our marketing friends listening to this are like, oh man, AI. But these are tools that our marketing team, marketing professionals can use. So it isn't just we're trying to keep the marketing folks out of it. Like let's create more time. Let's be more efficient with our time.
Yes.
Let's educate the market in creative ways that aren't annoying and don't cross those lines. And so I think those are really good examples, man. Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
I want to kind of hit a couple things here. Two kind of rapid fire questions. I'll ask the questions and then just go at it. Number one, do you have a personal habit or practice that you've instilled that you do, weekly, monthly, whatever that is, that's helped you in your career and in your leadership? So that's question number one. And question number two is, what are you most excited about in this industry? The vision for the future. What's just getting you really excited about the market that we're all operating in and serving? So there you go, rapid fire.
Rapid fire. All right. Thing I do, I'd say I almost do it daily. So I just because we sit around a lot, right, as salespeople sometimes, and we take phone calls as we walk around the office. But I always try to get up and go for a walk in the neighborhood, mile walk, whatever I can squeeze in. But so one, that kind of mental, the wellness, right? You need to keep yourself in relative shape, because at the end of the day, your wellness is what matters. That's what you put out there is what matters. So that's one big thing. But listening to other sales folks in their podcasts, shameless plug as well, hearing different perspectives, because I only have my perspective on things and the people I've come across in my career. It's always good to just grab from all these other podcasts, all these other YouTube videos, and understand how other people view not only the healthcare industry, but talk about like the banking industry, the industrial market, pulling from valuable lessons that they have into yours. That's the game changer, is hearing from other industries what the correlations are and how they're solving what we're trying to go solve, bringing it over to your industry. So I try to do that daily as much as possible. Sometimes I can, sometimes I can't, but I definitely would encourage that for anybody. Just go listen to podcasts in other industries too. That's super valuable. And James, I forgot your second question because I talked too much.
No, all good. Second question is, what are you most excited about in the industry, and kind of your vision for the future? Anything you want to share that you're excited about?
Yeah, I would say my this is what I would love to see in the healthcare market. We need to become so much more consumer centric.
Yes.
We think about this. I'm a 30 something year old male. I still have to call to schedule an appointment with my PCP. There are companies out here, and you mentioned one of them that I used to work with, that go solve that. But let's just take away the going finding a PCP when I want. Just a general broad spectrum of healthcare. We as healthcare don't treat patients great. Can you imagine if Amazon delivered the same type of value that healthcare provided to its consumers? They would never have a business. And so, I mean, sometimes you'd rather go to the DMV versus go to the physician's office. So I think
They're
a
very
big
similar
change.
sometimes.
They're very similar sometimes. I think that monumental shift. Now, I don't know how you go change that, because I think that healthcare is very difficult. There's a lot of regulations, there's a lot of red tape, but there are definitely some things that are changing slowly that are encouraging. But I think the most innovative organizations will push that envelope, and they'll try to create that Amazon type of experience. And I mean, that's talk about first to market. that's a great thing you want to be, especially when you know your market.
Yeah, absolutely. Have you, just curious, have you tried faxing in your requests for appointments? That saves a lot of time.
I kind of want to try that.
Yeah, Doug
Maybe that's
actually
the
still
out of the
has, Doug
box. Maybe
still
that's
has a
the,
fax machine
I do. It's right. It's right over
in
here.
his office with
That's
the paper with the holes on the side.
yeah.
Yeah, I mean it's incredible. Yeah, and let's see, in terms of kind of future vision, from a sales perspective, where do you see I mean, you mentioned the tools, kind of saving time with AI. Anything else on the sales kind of front as sales professionals that we should be looking out for that you're kind of watching?
Yeah, I would say more of a skill. So kind of dialing back here, kind of those early startup companies. So and sometimes we fall victim of this, and I find myself too, where like I look, we're trying to bring on new talent to the organization, and sometimes we need to look a little harder at the criterias that we're searching for when we bring in people like, oh, they have to have 15 years experience and this and that. Sometimes the best folks are that just have those soft skills, that they're just good with people, good at listening, good at solving the problems, and all they need is an opportunity to blossom. You can teach healthcare, right? We were taught healthcare. We didn't know healthcare one time. But if you have all the things that I can't teach you, be a good person, humility, listening, good talking skills, the rest can be taught. And I think that's one thing as organizations evolve. The reference Moneyball. Let's put the right players in the right position to win. I think it's focusing more on the Moneyball dynamic versus we need the Jason Giambi, the Barry Bonds at every position. You don't need a Barry Bonds in every position. You need people that are really good at what they do in that position. So that's one thing that I know I reflect on all the time, is putting people in the right positions to succeed. They don't need to have the tremendous experience, just those soft skills to succeed.
Yeah. I
Yeah,
think that's
and the humility to
yeah.
learn. Yeah, go ahead, Doug.
I think, well, I agree. I think it's a powerful idea, powerful statement. We had a conversation with another guest. I like to refer to as my resume rant, which I'll redo a part of it, which is I absolutely detest resumes. I think they're a facade, and it doesn't give you, if you just simply rely on the resume, it doesn't give you the opportunity to pressure test for those soft skills or understand what initiative that person's going to take. As you've grown into a leadership position and you are leading teams now, you touched on a little bit of the attributes you look for in a salesperson as they come onto your team. What are some of the mechanical things that you expect them to do? And I guess, Juan, probably to bracket that, hey, I need you to make 20 calls a day, or it's more so 5 calls, but I want to, when I listen to the recording, if you are listening, if you may use a coaching tool, what have you, I need to hear that you understood what the organization was, you referenced a priority, what have you. What are some of those more mechanical day-to-day things that you ask your sales team to do that you believe then sets them up for success?
Yeah, I think honestly, it's mechanically looking at what's in your pipeline. So like if you look in different sales stages, instead of looking at it and saying, oh, this is going to close for the positive reason, the positive reason, the positive reason, flip it the other way. Why is this not going to close? And how do I mitigate that reason? Because once we start, clients got the contract in hand, they've done red lines. What can go wrong? Well, the CEO could go on vacation or not sign it. So how do you go mitigate that to avoid that pitfall? And I mean, even with lower stage opportunities, right? Like, hey, how do we bring in more people and not just silo it? That's a risk, right? Like, hey, I need to involve more constituents here, so that way we can spread this out across multiple budgets, and it doesn't seem like a big nut for somebody to take on. And I think that's what I try to challenge the folks is like, let's identify risks versus let's talk about the positives, but let's identify the risks, that why could this fail in the future for whatever reason. So I think it's a good exercise. I'd say do it weekly, because daily would be kind of exhaustive, but weekly, just looking at your pipeline and understanding how am I going to get to this number? What's going to be the risk to get to that number?
Do y'all
Yeah.
use a defined methodology? We reference strategic selling, right? There's the Challenger method, value-based selling, Blue Sheets, Miller Hyman, et cetera, et cetera. Is there one particular one that you lean towards, or is it more so a composite of different components you've seen work and then you promulgate down into your teams?
Yeah, I think all those methodologies are fantastic. They all, it's wild. I've been a part of organizations that use one, and
Mm-hmm.
they're widely successful. But there are times where, like, man, if we would have just done maybe this gap selling right here, we would have taken it to the next level instead of maybe doing Challenger. So really, from our perspective, I'm like, hey, let's educate you on all the different types of selling, so that way you know it exists. And it's crazy when you open up the book and you allow people to learn and educate themselves and train themselves on all these different things. A brain is a beautiful thing. The brain will automatically start flexing,
Mm.
and you get to see it. You're just watching. You're like, oh wow, they just pulled that from this. I know they did, and then they flip back to this. So I don't push any type of methodology. I'm just like, hey, I got gap selling back here. I got strategic selling. I got Challenger. Just read them. Go watch a podcast about it. YouTube.
Yeah.
Educate
Yeah.
yourself. And yeah, that's how we approach it.
Yeah, that's actually what you just described is now called the Corona method. So we coined it here.
Trademarked here.
You guys heard it here. There may be some issues with a certain beverage company. We're not going to deal with that.
For our listeners, if you're interested in signing up for the class, that will be kicking off in October.
Yeah, I mean, we may
Low
draw,
fee,
it depends. Like
low
if you
fee.
advertise the Corona method, you might get some people who show up and think it's something
That's
different.
right.
But we'll see. We might have a bunch of spring breakers show up with limes.
Hey, but they will come out as better people.
Wait.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
We're
definitely
all
be
about
happy.
value. All about value. So, well, hey, I know we're kind of coming toward the end of our time. We could talk for hours. We would love to have you back.
Yes.
This has been just really rich experience. I've learned something. I know that our listeners have taken things away from this that they're going to be able to grab hold of. Thank you. So we got to hit you with some really hard questions now. And I'm going to I'll add a bonus question, and that is, do you like Corona? Do you think it's a real beer, or do you have a preferred beverage that you would like to promote for our listeners?
Yikes. I will tell you, in my early years, a Corona Light with some lime and some salt, that was awesome. I love it. As I've gotten older, it's a little harder to wake up. So I've actually switched, and I'm sure my friends will, when they see this, they'll be like, "Really? You said that on a podcast?" A big extra dirty martini for that.
Hey, yeah.
That's my jam, and give me one of those. I am in a happy spot.
And is that later in the day, or is that at 6 a.m.? Just asking. Curious. No judgment here.
Yeah, 6 p.m.
6
Okay,
p.m.
PM. All right,
When the smoking jacket comes out.
There you go.
You have to get the
good to clarify that.
That's right.
Awesome. And then we've asked this of all of our guests. So you've got a big client coming into the Kansas City area for one night, and they want barbecue. Where do you take them?
Oh man, I'm not gonna take them where I would go, because so I love Arthur Bryant's, the one, the original one. I love that. I just love the majesticness of that.
I say, why not, right? Vulnerability. It's not a white tablecloth place, right? It's going to be what you get, right?
We're rolling up. But yeah, if it was more like clients that I've gotten to really go to know with, I was like, yeah, let's go to Arthur Bryant's, let's get after it. If I'm bringing, some clients that were trying to like wine and dine, all this, I've been a couple times to Q39. They have really good barbecue. I mean, I can't complain. So you can't go wrong with either. I will say, I recently went to Austin, Texas, and their barbecue is good, but I'm just like, you know what? We in Kansas City are so spoiled. What bad barbecue is like golden nectar in other parts of the country. So we're really spoiled, but I like me some Arthur Bryant's.
Awesome, man. Hey, way to go. We'll add that into the tabulations. You know, we're spoiled here in Kansas City with Patrick Mahomes and amazing barbecue. So what more could we ask for?
There you
And
go.
And
we also
great
have
guest.
Juan. We also have Juan Corona.
We have Juan. That's right. Juan, this has been a fantastic conversation. As James mentioned, we absolutely will want to do a redux of this because there are things we glazed on the top. And I know for both James and myself and for our listeners, digging deeper will be just a joy and valuable. So we will do a V2 of this probably as we segue into the next season. But thank you so much for your time. Thank you for being a guest on the Counterweight. It has been a wonderful conversation.
Yeah, likewise. You all are amazing, and thanks for doing this because I think the entire industry benefits tremendously.
Thanks,
Awesome.
man. We didn't even pay you to say that, dude. We appreciate you. All
Thank
right.
you. Yeah,
We'll
You
see you
guys.
soon, everyone. Cheers.
Thank you for listening. We are excited to bring new episodes out each week. We are incredibly grateful to our guests and our listeners. Let us know what you think by commenting on the episodes. We are proudly sponsored by the Upper Right Corner, which provides advice on strategic growth, including growth assessments and strategy, go-to-network planning, sales leadership and team coaching, and fractional leadership roles. For more, visit theupperrightcorner.com. Waypoint Healthcare Solutions is also proud to sponsor the Counterweight podcast. Waypoint HCS is a focused consulting organization helping health systems, providers, and organizations to develop and implement patient engagement strategies. Waypoint HCS provides strategic consulting and patient engagement technology guidance and selection. Waypoint also helps support implementation and ongoing program management. For more, visit Waypoint HCS's LinkedIn page or waypointhcs.com. Thank you to our guests and our listeners. As always, you can find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, Instagram, and LinkedIn. Subscribe, like, and follow, and we look forward to joining you again next Wednesday for another episode of The Counterweight.